This story began like many others, a young mother, happy and surrounded by the care of her family, but everything changed abruptly on a fateful day when her body was found in her own home on November 12, 1966. The police discovered many mysterious circumstances, but there was not enough evidence to solve the case. It remained unsolved for many years until, almost 6 decades later, in December 2022, an unexpected phone call gave new momentum to the investigation, leading to a long-awaited resolution. Karen Snider was born on January 27, 1948, in the small town of Cedar Lake, Indiana. She grew up in a loving family with parents who valued a simple and peaceful life. Her father, Harlan, was a handyman who often did repairs for neighbors, and her mother, Emma, was a homemaker and an active member of the local community. Since childhood, Karen loved nature and spent a lot of time playing in the woods and lakes around town. She was a curious girl, often bringing home interesting rocks and flowers she found in the forest. The family lived modestly but happily, surrounded by warmth and care for each other. Karen had a younger brother, Jack, born in 1953, whom she loved to take care of and share her adventures with. In school, Karen showed a talent for drawing and dreamed of becoming an artist. She often stayed after classes in the school studio, drawing portraits of her friends and teachers. In 1963, her work won a city drawing contest, which was a true celebration for her and her first major success. In 1965, when Karen was 17 years old, she met her future husband, Paul Snider, at the local library, where she often went for inspiration for her drawings. Paul worked for the railroad and had a strong sense of responsibility and care for his loved ones. He was captivated by Karen's creative nature and her joyful spirit. Their relationship quickly developed, and in June 1966, they decided to get married. Karen and Paul's wedding took place on June 25, 1966, and was modest but filled with love and warmth. They moved to a small house in Calumet City, a suburb of Chicago, where they began building their life together. Paul supported Karen in her hobbies, and together they created a cozy home filled with her paintings and memories. In October 1966, their daughter Paula was born, and Karen enthusiastically embraced her role as a mother, caring for the baby while continuing her creative pursuits. Karen and Paul's family settled on the same street as Paul's parents, which allowed Paul to frequently see his family, and his parents could spend time with their grandchild. Calumet City, with a population of about 25,000, was a quiet and peaceful place, and Karen felt safe there. Most of her time was spent caring for the child and doing household chores, while Paul worked at the railroad station, providing for the family. On the evening of November 12, 1966, Paul tried calling Karen several times from work, but she did not answer. This seemed strange, as Karen was supposed to be home and could not just leave, leaving their 2-month-old baby unattended. He then called his parents, who lived just a few houses away, and asked them to check if everything was all right. Paul's parents went to Karen's house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. Without a spare key and not wanting to disturb the peace, the parents decided not to break in. After several minutes of unsuccessful attempts to get Karen's attention, they returned home and called Paul back. Paul's worry grew, and he decided to leave work early to personally check if everything was all right. When Paul arrived at the house, he noticed that the porch light was off, and the blinds on the windows were tightly drawn. This was unusual. Karen always left the porch light on when Paul worked the evening shift. Paul cautiously approached the front door and found it unlocked. Entering the living room, he was relieved to see his daughter Paula, peacefully sleeping in her playpen near the television, which was still on. However, Karen was nowhere to be seen. Paul began calling her name, checking each room. When he went upstairs, he noticed that the light switch on the stairs wasn't working. Paul reached their bedroom and turned on the lamp. What lay before him was a horrific sight. The room was in disarray, with bloodstains everywhere. Karen lay lifeless on the floor. In a state of shock, Paul realized that his wife was dead. The police arrived soon after Paul called them and immediately began examining the crime scene. Several oddities were found in the house, which puzzled investigators. Shallow marks were found on the back door lock, indicating an attempted break-in, but the door remained closed. It appeared that the perpetrator had tried to enter through the back door but then chose another way. A broken basement window, from which a trail of blood led to the front door, was the first major clue. Investigators speculated that the perpetrator might have injured themselves while breaking the glass. However, the fact that they did not enter through the basement but instead went to the front door suggested that the door was either unlocked, or Karen had opened it herself. A large amount of blood was found in the living room. It was likely that the perpetrator caught Karen while she was near her daughter's crib. The blood trail led from the living room to the stairs and then up to the second floor, ending at the bedroom where Karen's body was found. The state of the bedroom suggested a fierce struggle, belongings were scattered, and bloodstains covered the floor and walls. Only Karen's blue wallet, which had about $50 in it, and one of the table lamps, which was of little value, were missing. Medical experts found 124 stab wounds on Karen's body, most of them to the chest, indicating extreme brutality. The weapon was a knife with a narrow blade, similar to a stiletto, but it was not found in the house or nearby. Karen was fully dressed, and there were no signs of sexual assault. However, investigators did not rule out that the motive for the crime could have been related to an attempted assault, which the perpetrator failed to carry out for some reason. The time of Karen's death was determined to be between 4 and 6 in the evening, meaning the perpetrator left the house several hours before Paul discovered her body. As is often the case in such situations, the first suspect was Karen's husband, Paul Snider. Investigators questioned him and tried to determine if he could have committed the crime. Paul denied his involvement, but investigators repeatedly summoned him for questioning, hoping for a confession. Paul maintained his innocence and continued to insist on his version of events. Karen's funeral took place 6 days after the murder. Paul attended with family and friends, but among those present, the investigators noticed something unusual. One of the men helping carry the coffin had a bandaged hand and a deep cut on his forehead. This was James, a friend of Paul and Karen, who worked with Paul on the railroad and had recently helped with repairs at their house. Investigators took an interest in this man. It soon emerged that on the night of the murder, James went to the hospital with serious wounds on his hands and face, and he received stitches. The perpetrator, breaking the basement window, had likely injured themselves, and now James became the second suspect. He was called in for questioning, where he stated that he had nothing to do with the murder. James explained his injuries by saying that on that evening, he was returning home from a bar, very drunk, stumbled over a tree stump, and fell, injuring himself on splinters. James' wife confirmed that he came home late that night, very drunk and injured. She noted that he behaved strangely and was shaking a lot, but emphasized that James was an alcoholic and often got drunk to that state. Questioning the bar patrons, investigators found those who saw James that evening but could not determine exactly when he left the establishment. Experts analyzed the blood found in Karen's house and discovered 2 different types. One matched Karen's blood, and the other was James' blood type. Although matching blood types was not direct evidence of guilt, it was enough to arrest James in hopes that he would confess to the crime. Meanwhile, investigators cleared Paul of suspicion, as his blood type did not match the samples found. However, James continued to insist on his innocence, claiming his wounds were the result of a fall. The collected fingerprints were smudged, and without DNA analysis, the evidence was insufficient. Therefore, James had to be released. In those years, the police did not disclose the names of suspects, so only Karen's relatives and closest friends knew about his questioning and the blood type match. In subsequent conversations with reporters, they expressed their belief that James might have been guilty, but proving it was impossible due to a lack of direct evidence. Karen's parents never learned the truth. Her father, Harlan, died in 1973, and her mother, Emma, in 1977, never getting justice for their daughter. Paul tried to cope with the loss and raised their daughter Paula alone, but soon remarried. His second wife, Margaret, became a real support for Paul and took on the role of mother to Paula, surrounding the girl with care and love. Relatives decided not to tell Paula the details of her mother's death, trying to shield her from the horrific details. When Paula was about 10 years old, the family decided to tell her the truth, realizing that she might hear it from strangers or accidentally read about it in the newspapers, as the case continued to be covered in the press. Later, as an adult, she gave multiple interviews to journalists, stating that she had not lost hope that the guilty person would be found and punished. Paul Snider passed away in 1989 at the age of 45 from health problems, never learning the truth about who killed his wife. After his death, Paula stayed with Margaret, who continued to support her and helped her cope with the grief. Despite the years that had passed since the tragedy, Paula never stopped trying to find the truth and regularly contacted the local police department, inquiring if there were any new leads in her mother's case. For decades, there was no significant progress in the investigation. The residents of Calumet City, once considered safe, could no longer feel as secure as before. Karen Snider's story became a reminder of the brutality that could come to any home and the importance of not forgetting those who became victims of injustice. But the years went by, and Karen Snider's case remained unsolved, despite all the investigators' efforts and the family's periodic appeals. It seemed that there was no hope left for solving this tragic story. Every time Paula contacted the police department, she was told that there were no new leads and the investigation was at a dead end. By the end of 2022, it seemed that Karen's case would forever remain unsolved, but fate had other plans. One December day, an unexpected call came into the police station. A 29-year-old man, whose voice sounded insistent and interested, inquired if there had been any new developments in the Karen Snider case. He explained that he had known about this crime since childhood, as his grandmother often talked about it, and they were distant relatives of Karen's family. The story had deeply affected him, and he had always wondered if there was any chance of finding the guilty party. The man said that he had recently been sitting at work, looking through old newspaper clippings about the case. He wondered why, despite technological advances, no answer had yet been found. Perhaps modern methods and resources would finally allow light to be shed on this tragedy. It was this thought that prompted him to contact the police and ask if new technologies could be used to solve the old case. The police officers, surprised by the young man's initiative, forwarded his message to the higher-ups. After some discussion, the police department decided to give Karen's case another chance. By that time, none of the detectives who had worked on the 1966 investigation were still working at the department, and a new team took on the task of reviewing all the available materials, essentially starting from scratch. The detectives began reviewing the materials stored in the archive and found that all the evidence and clues related to the case had been well preserved over the past 56 years. Among them were Karen's clothes, several items from her home, and photographs of the crime scene. Unfortunately, the perpetrator's blood samples collected from the floor had not been preserved, but the detectives decided to use whatever they had to conduct new analyses using modern technology. All the items found were sent to a forensic laboratory, where experts began carefully examining each one using the latest DNA analysis methods and other advanced tools. The police also began questioning everyone who might have had any connection to the case and who was still alive at the time. This included old friends and neighbors of Karen, as well as people who had been involved in the original investigation. Months passed, and the work on Karen's case progressed slowly but steadily. The detectives spent long hours reviewing old documents, making inquiries, and consulting experts. They understood that what was at stake was not only solving the crime but also restoring justice for Karen's family, who had waited far too long for answers. And then, 16 months after the investigation was reopened, the detectives received the long-awaited call from the lab. It was March 2024 when forensic experts reported an unexpected breakthrough. One of the items belonging to Karen turned out to be more informative than expected. Microscopic traces were found on her clothing, which were analyzed using modern DNA technology. The experts found several drops of blood on Karen's dress, which turned out to belong to an unknown man. Thanks to modern methods, they were able to extract a DNA profile, and the police immediately went to a judge to obtain a warrant for a genetic sample from one of the main suspects, James, who was still alive. James, now a 79-year-old man, lived in a neighboring state and led a rather secluded lifestyle. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and arguments presented by the investigators, granted permission to take a DNA sample from James. The police promptly went to his home. James seemed unprepared for the visit but did not resist. The sample was taken and sent to the lab to be compared with the traces found on Karen's dress. After a few days filled with anxious anticipation, the detectives received the final answer. James' DNA fully matched the blood found on Karen's dress. This result became crucial evidence that James was in Karen's house on the day of her murder. Moreover, it meant that he had originally lied to investigators about how he received his injuries. Everything pointed to his involvement in this brutal crime. On April 29, 2024, the police returned to James' house to arrest him. When they informed him of the DNA match, he looked tired and worn but not surprised. This time, he did not deny anything and confessed to what he had done. James admitted that he had known all his life that he would eventually be caught. He said he had experienced immense fear and guilt that had haunted him all these years. He did not reveal all the details of what happened on that fateful day, and the investigators were not quick to disclose information to the public, as the trial was still ongoing. After being charged with first-degree murder, considering James' condition and his advanced age, the likelihood of his escape was assessed as extremely low. The police decided that strict custody measures were not required, which caused significant dissatisfaction among Karen's relatives. The family, who had lost a daughter and sister more than half a century ago, was forced to see that the person involved in the murder had lived his entire life in freedom, and this decision only deepened their sense of injustice. Despite this, his arrest was a significant step toward justice for Karen's family. When Paula learned of James' confession, she felt mixed emotions: joy that the guilty person was finally found, and bitterness over how many years it had taken for the truth to come out. As for the motive of the crime, it remained unclear. The first hearing in the case took place at the end of May 2024, and the details are expected to become known by the time the trial concludes. According to journalists, James had unrequited feelings for Karen and was jealous of her husband, Paul. He could not accept that Karen chose Paul, and this jealousy and failed love may have driven his actions. In addition, James was intoxicated that day, which likely played a role in the crime. Karen's family expressed their gratitude to the detectives for their diligent work and for ensuring that, after so many years, justice finally began to prevail. However, they understood that even if James were convicted, his health and age meant that he was unlikely to spend much time in prison. Nevertheless, the very fact of his arrest and confession gave the family some sense of closure. Karen's 57-year-old daughter, Paula, shared her thoughts with reporters. She said that the day she was informed of her mother's killer being caught was the best day of her life. Paula admitted that she had lost hope that the case would ever be solved and was surprised to learn that the evidence had been preserved well enough to serve as proof after so many years. She also shared that she held James responsible not only for her mother's death but also for her father Paul's early death. Karen's death had dealt Paul a severe blow, and living with the knowledge that his close friend might have been involved in the tragedy broke him. He lived his life in the shadow of that pain and mistrust, and according to Paula, it deeply affected his health and emotional state. The trial is not yet complete, and many details remain unknown. But Karen's family was finally able to feel that the truth had come out, and that the guilty person, even after half a century, was being held accountable. This was an important step toward healing for everyone connected to Karen, and it gave them hope that justice can prevail, even after many years. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new investigations. See you next time.